To my listeners and now viewers, welcome back to an episode of Who Would You Tell? Today, I am pleased to announce that I have what is for me, I think genuinely like one of the biggest guests I'm going to get at this point in time. Genuinely, for those who know me well, you know I have always had a very strong interest in football generally, and that's taken me to lots of different places. That's taken me to YouTube, and I've tried to find people who are trying to do similar things or have done similar things. And one of those people that I found along the way is Dougie Critchley. Dougie represents Football Daily. He's worked for Sky Sports. For me, I have to be honest here, in my top three at Football Daily, alongside Hamill and one other person I won't say since he's left Football Daily as well. But genuinely, Dougie, you've been a very big part of just me seeing that there is a landscape for football fans generally to kind of like find their way into football broadcasting generally. So, dude, thank you. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for being here, and yeah, thank you for bailing yourself. But first things first, how are you, man?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you so much for that really kind introduction. Yeah, I'm really well, thank you. I've absolutely loved working at Football Daily for the last 7 years or so, and it's always great to meet people that have helped us, along the way. The channel wouldn't be where it is, and I wouldn't have got the opportunities that I have without fans like yourself, tuning in on a daily basis. So yeah, really do appreciate it, and yeah, looking forward to our chat today.
No, thank you, man. Honestly. So I think let's get right into it. I think the way I prefaced the conversation was by pointing out one of the big things, that getting football is just generally really hard if you don't have a footballing background. So I guess I want to know, on a personal level, what made you so sure that this is what you were going to do? Like, why did you keep going?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've always been really, really passionate about sport, not just football. Sort of growing up, I played a lot of sport, not to an incredibly high level, but played a bit at university, played for my school rugby team, did a lot of running growing up. It was always something that my family took very seriously. We had a lot of, sort of competitions between siblings, etc. It was a big part of growing up. And I thought that if the next best thing to becoming a professional sportsman, which I wasn't good enough to be able to do, would be to still be in sport and be able to talk about it. So it probably dawned on me at university. I was studying international relations, so sort of like history, politics, a combination of that. And I knew I didn't want to go into anything related to that. My brother worked in insurance and very much like an office job. I kind of knew I didn't want to do that. So sometimes it's about knowing what you don't want to do as opposed to what you do. And I kind of worked out that, I really enjoyed talking. I really enjoyed talking to people. I really enjoyed finding out their stories. I was obsessed with sport. And I'd done a little bit of student radio at that time. I'd done a little bit of events hosting. I just thought, why not football broadcasting or sports broadcasting? At the time, football was my biggest sport, but I was sort of almost as interested in rugby, cricket, tennis, athletics, boxing, even Formula One at that stage. So it was really, football was massive for me, but it was actually sport in general, really. And I just decided to go down that route and sort of try and make it work.
No, that makes sense. I'm glad you did, honestly. And I think a lot of people, like especially with that part you said about knowing what you don't want to do, I think that's played a very big role for me personally, because it's just like there's certain things I can't do. Like I know there's certain, but it's like it's not gonna work if I don't try and push towards this one way or another. I'm curious, how did your family feel about it though? Because I think I'd imagine it's different in the UK if you're trying to go into that. Maybe oversight.
Yeah, I mean, I was incredibly fortunate. I had really supportive parents, and now it's just my mum. But yeah, she's always been really supportive over my career and both of them backed me to try and make a success of it. I was in a fortunate position because after university, I then did a master's degree, which was, an extra couple of £1,000 for a year. I was in a fortunate position where my parents could help me out with that. So I didn't have to, work alongside doing that. So I could really focus on my studies. I was lucky enough to be able to stay with my sister, who was living in London at the time. So I had a very fortunate setup to be able to pursue my dreams. But you're right, it does require a certain amount of determination. No one hands you anything on a plate. It is a fiercely competitive industry. I mean, I feel like, particularly in the UK, I'm not sure what it's like in South Africa, but particularly in the UK, getting a job in any sphere at the moment is really, really difficult. The economy is not in a great situation. There's loads of young people with loads of skills, but not enough jobs going around. So yeah, you've really got to back yourself, and you've got to make yourself try and stand out from a really, really full crowd. And I think the best way of doing that is to try and get skills in a niche, try and get skills in a certain area, and then back yourself. If you want to be a content creator, if you want to be a presenter, if you want to be a podcaster, producer, start making that content. I started a vlog, it was actually initially a blog when I was at university, then did a vlog, which was watched by, 20 people, most of which was my mum. But that is just where you manage to experiment. Like, I interviewed my friends who were into football. I interviewed other people that were into different sports. I experimented with different formats. And it was just about putting yourself out there, learning what you're good at, learning what you're not good at, working on your weaknesses, honing in on your skills. And from there, you build a little bit more confidence. And it's also important that if you are lucky enough to get an interview anywhere, you've got a body of work to show them. There's so many people that go to these interviews or say, I want to work in sport. I love sport. About 50% of people, maybe even higher on earth, everyone loves sport. So you've got to show why you're worth employing, why you're worth taking a chance on, and having that body of work, whether it's a podcast listened to by 5 people or 5,000 people, is just the way forward. So I would definitely encourage, like yourself, like any other sort of budding journalist, start doing what you want to do and just build up a body of work.
That's solid advice, and that's something that you actually shared with me previously. I don't know if you remember the conversation, like maybe 2 years ago. And honestly, I think that probably is the best way to approach it. Like, approach anything you're passionate about, just to be doing the thing you say you want to do, right? You want to get better at it, you want to progress, you want to take the steps to get to a certain point. It means that you need to already be doing it. The idea of one day doing it is not, I don't think it's a realistic thing.
Yeah, and absolutely. And you don't need to be a certain age. You don't need any qualifications. You just need, a camera if you want to be a presenter. You just need like some form of writing material if you want to be a writer. The options are there. You can learn all these skills about how to edit videos. You can learn how to edit podcasts on the internet, on YouTube. Like, YouTube, tutorials are amazing. So it's not all about paying for, a fancy master's or doing a degree in it. Everyone can be their own content creator, and just back yourself, because there's absolutely no reason that you can't be the next, Gary Lineker or whoever you want to be. It's got to be someone, and there's a decent chance that it could be you if you really back yourself.
Yeah, that's really good advice. In terms of trying to make it work when you know it's as saturated as it is, I think that's probably my biggest concern. Did you ever feel like you reached a point where you were still trying to prove yourself? Like, you needed to know that, okay, I'm not just one in the million, I'm one who's like working extremely hard. Did you feel like you got a moment of recognition that made you realize, okay, cool, now I'm here? Or has it still been a process for you?
I think you can't really ever be sure of your position. You can't ever really be sure of the path you're on. There is definitely, checkpoints along the way. You land your first job, you get told you're doing well at that job, etc. But having that drive and always being aware that, it could all go in an instant. I think, professional sports people say that, and I think it's the same people that work in broadcasting as well. You're only really you're only really as good as your last job. You're only really as competent as you've recently shown. So having that drive to constantly get better and make mistakes along the way. Mistakes are part of broadcasting. It is inevitable. We'll both make numerous mistakes in the course of this podcast, but it's about how you recover from it. It's about how you move on from it, and having that get up and go and that determination to right any wrong that comes your way and really stick at it. So, to be honest, there wasn't really a moment where I thought I've made it or, I'm on the right path. I mean, I'm really happy with the path I've chosen, but you can always get so much better at whatever you're choosing to do. And I think I'd never want to get comfortable in what I was doing. But I think it's just about, growing. If you are trying to grow a page, or if you are trying to grow an Instagram page or a YouTube account, it's about connecting with your community. It's about consistency as well. There's no point uploading, once every 3 months. If you want to start fostering a community which are going to drive you to success, you need regularity of uploads. And I also saw a video the other day from Mr. Beast, the big YouTuber, and he said, just make 100 videos and make sure each video is slightly better than the previous one, or make sure each vlog or each podcast, etc., is slightly better than the last one. Find a slightly new thing that you can improve on. So your first 5 to 10 might not be brilliant, but by the time you've done 100 and you've got 100 things better, you've got 100 things more honed down in terms of quality, you'll end up with a really good product. So just put yourself out there, start making content, get things wrong, get things right, and then fixate on the things you're getting right, and also work on your weaknesses, and you'll end up being a much better broadcaster.
That's really solid advice. I especially like the point about what Mr. B said. I've seen that quote as well, because there's something that used to bug me down quite early on, And I was just like, why hasn't it gotten to a certain point? I was just like, even if it had like been really good in the first 10 episodes, right? There's no real way of knowing. It's just like, would that be like the best of the podcast? Like the first 10 episodes. I don't think that that'd be a helpful way of looking at it. It's just like, dude, in an ideal scenario, if you say you want to do it as badly as you want to do it, wouldn't it make sense that right now you can be as shit as you want to be, and then it just picks up later, like with time? It doesn't have to be perfect now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about fostering enough skills. It's about developing enough relationships. It's about working on your skills to a level that you are employable. And I think there are going to be opportunities out there if you work hard enough, if you are persistent enough, and if you have the right way of going about approaching people. So when I finished, I just touched the mic there, but when I finished university, I messaged loads of people that I really admired in the industry, mainly British broadcasters, and a number of them replied, and some even met me for coffee. Some were just incredibly helpful people. They gave little tips. One guy even recommended the master's degree that I ended up doing. So approaching people and putting yourself out there, and yes, people like who have made it, for want of a better phrase, are going to have loads and loads of requests. But actually, the way you can message someone, with a little bit of flattery involved, with showing that you actually have personalized a message to them. You're not sending out 50 of the same messages. It needs to be, worked around, maybe compliment a little bit of their work, maybe say what you particularly admire about them, etc. And then say, is there any way that you could, hopefully you could reply, maybe we go for a coffee, maybe we have a Zoom chat, etc. You start building up a rapport with people you admire, and hopefully they'd be able to help you and push you in the right direction, because it is all about, there is a certain degree of luck involved as well. Like you do need a certain break. Like when I finished my master's degree, I must have applied for 30, 40 different jobs, didn't get any of them, didn't hear back from most of them, saw this job at Football Daily and have been there ever since. And if I hadn't seen that job on that particular day, who knows how things would have turned out. I like to back myself, and I think anyone that is trying to make a success of themselves in this industry needs to back themselves. But it is a certain amount of luck along the way. It's who you meet, it's when you meet them, it's what they say, and just riding on the back of that as well. So definitely just persist. If you're trying to break into the industry, you can make it. There's no reason you can't make it, but you've got to be persistent, and you've got to go about it the right way. You've got to personalize those messages and be really persistent.
Yeah, no, that's really solid, really solid. I'm curious though, do you know what else you want to do in football? Because you say you've made, like, you've got a foothold, right? Like you're there more or less. There's a way to kind of go. Do you always want to be involved in broadcasting? Do you think you'd want to work in football more broadly, work at a club perhaps? Do you know what it looks like for you now?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think I definitely want to stay in broadcasting. I wouldn't have any interest, and I wouldn't have the knowledge base to go into coaching. I don't think scouting would be particularly for me. There are a lot of time on the road, not necessarily that much reward. But what I really enjoy about football is the sort of the enjoyment that it brings people, the connection that it brings people, the storylines, the narratives, the transfers, the ups and downs, the controversy, the whole thing. And I enjoy making what can be quite complicated stories, simplifying them and trying to tell those stories in the most engaging and captivating way. So I want to carry on doing that. In terms of a goal, my ultimate goal is to present Match of the Day. That is what I'd absolutely dream to do. Look, it's very, very unrealistic. It's probably going to go to a former footballer. It's probably going to go to a different broadcaster. But you've got to have a dream, no matter how unrealistic it is. I think having a goal is really important, and working towards that is the way to go about it. In terms of my near future, I'd like to carry on presenting more on Sky Sports, being used on multiple programs. Maybe having a regular slot on Sky Sports News, something along those lines. Then you sort of progress up to, maybe fronting some of their live shows, etc. And you kind of go from there. So I'm really excited about where it could potentially go. But as I said earlier, you've kind of got to be aware that it's a really competitive industry. Things can change in an instant. You've got to be on your A game, and we'll see what happens.
I think I agree with you in terms of not wanting to go into scouting. I like to often claim that I found a player before somebody else does. I think that's the full extent that my scouting goes. I think though, what you just said there about thinking you might not necessarily get to Match of the Day, the reason why I go, because I had that thought as well, right? That maybe it's too far that like an ex-footballer is always most likely to get that big job. But I think we are moving as content creators to a point in time where that might not necessarily always be the case, right? There will come a point in time where they look and Gary Lineker has to retire and he has to pass it on. There might not be somebody else who is as good as he is at that job, and they might look and think there are people who've been broadcasters, technically speaking, for longer than any of the professionals who supposedly want the job. So I think my question is, obviously you know that what you're doing and what we're trying to do is extremely difficult. If you push this far along, why do you think that people end up... this is a long question. Why do you think people end up getting lost in the shuffle anyway?
Yeah, it's a difficult question. I think there is still a bit of a fear about from TV producers in particular. I think it's changing on online and on social media that in order to offer opinion or to have the best opinions about football or any sport, you need to be a former player. And I think that is quite ingrained in quite old school thinking. You look at the value that some YouTubers are able to add, that loads of content creators on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, etc., they're seeing the game in far greater depth, or at least they have the potential to see it in far greater depth than some of these former footballers that just go on there and, splurge out a number of cliches, and there's not really much depth to it. They clearly haven't done their research about anyone outside of the Premier League, and it can be a little bit frustrating as a viewer. So I do think there is a movement towards, appreciating people for the quality of their work rather than what they've done in the previous 40 years, whether they were, a former footballer or,
it doesn't matter that
a
you were at
YouTuber.
Bayern in the 1990s. Like, you don't watch that much football. Like,
I think exactly.
We are getting to the point where there's going to have to be that kind of shift.
Well, exactly. It's got to be about the quality rather than just the names on it. And yes, there's hopefully a really nice blend where you can meet in the middle on that. Gary Neville and Jamie Carragher, for example. I know I'm a little bit biased because I work for Sky, but I do genuinely think they're excellent. I'm not going to call out others, but I do think there's some pundits that get regularly used, and I don't think they offer that much insight, really. And it's about telling people what they can't necessarily see or telling them something that they didn't necessarily know. So it's very easy to describe play, pick out, oh, that's a great pass, etc. But why is it a great pass? And that's where I think former players are really useful. If they are asked the right questions, they can really explore things that, I can't do because I've never played at Old Trafford in front of 70,000 people in that heat. But I don't think it just has to be that. It doesn't just have to be what happened in my day. It doesn't just have to be this is what my manager did 30 years ago. There is like a chance to be a little bit more ambitious with our broadcasting and bring a bit more tactical analysis or a little bit more background to some of these more obscure players. So I definitely think there's a nice blend and both worlds can hopefully coexist together and actually make each other better.
Yeah, I think so too. That part you mentioned about mentioning like why a pass is good. I think someone like Michael Owen is really good when speaking specifically about like a striker's finish. I think in that specific mold, there aren't many better that you'd want to hear from, right? Than like an outright goal scorer.
Yeah, absolutely.
We get lost in just like, no, you have insight about this thing, but let's also try and move the conversation more broadly with other people. Like, I don't want to hear Michael Owen speak about management. He's never been a manager. like it doesn't make sense to kind of force people to provide insight around things that that's not why you find them interesting. That's not why they're here, right? But it's hard. I guess trying to perfectly produce a show, as you know, it's not as simple as we're detailing it, right? You don't know how a conversation's going to go. You don't know how long your question might be, and you end up rambling like me, and then suddenly you look like you have less on you than you might have.
Well, no, I'm not rambling in the slightest. I totally get your point. I feel like, there was a moment last season where I think Daniel Sturridge was starting to be used more on Sky coverage, and listening to him talk about finishing, getting the pros talking about what they're passionate about. I feel like Ian Wright is very good at talking about finishing. Sometimes I don't think he brings that much insight in other areas of the game. That's just Rio Ferdinand would be very interesting to talk about, defending and the art of defending, but, not in every facet of the game you'd want to hear about. I don't mean to pull out specific people.
But everyone has limitations. I think that's what it is, right? I think
exactly.
I think that's why you do need the perspective of fans. You need the perspective of people who have like experience at varying different levels. It wouldn't make sense if every single person that you engaged with only knew exactly what you knew. The idea is that everyone else would have something to contribute. I just think football media at times has become, just like an old boys club, for lack of a better description.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like whenever they try and do something a little bit braver with different personalities, different ethnicities, different genders, there's always the same backlash on social media. And obviously you shouldn't cater to these quite dinosaur-like creatures that just reside in dark areas of the web complaining about change. But that it is clear that, people don't like change very much. But I think that's no reason really not to force a different narrative. If you think football broadcasting can be updated, and I'm talking directly to producers like myself and other people working in the media, yourself, we should definitely be the pushers of change, and you do see the quality that change can bring. I didn't necessarily think Micah Richards was the strongest pundit when he first broke out in the game. Now I think he's got the perfect blend of like personality and good insight as well, and it is just about, as I said at the beginning, it's about getting things wrong. It's about getting better all the time, and he is clearly getting better. And so there's success stories when you do start trying to mix things up, do things a little bit different. Micah Richards wasn't a huge name. Yes, he played for England. Yes, he'd had a fairly long Premier League career, but he wasn't a superstar in the same mould as, a Paul Scholes, a Roy Keane, a Rio Ferdinand, etc. But yet he's managed to carve out a pretty good niche for himself. And so backing talent and being aware of not just having a load of, plus 50, plus 40 white males on a show just makes it so much better to have that diversity of voices, diversity of opinions, the whole thing. So yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of benefits to freshening things up.
Yeah, no doubt. So I want to ask you about something more personal. Obviously, you're a Sunderland fan, which I have to assume is a geographical choice, or geographical circumstance rather than a choice. I think football fans generally experience and see the world in very, very different ways. I've always wanted to ask, how do you think you see football in comparison to the average Chelsea fan?
That's a good question. To answer your question about Sunderland, yes, that is a family link. That is my granddad worked for the club in the 1980s. So it was my uncle was into it. My dad was never particularly into football, but through my uncle and through my brother and cousins were Sunderland fans. In terms of how I see football, you get certain fans, and I think it's particularly prevalent these days on social media, that are their club first, if that makes sense. They are a Chelsea fan. They are a Newcastle fan. They're a Man United fan. And I consider myself more of a football fan. I'm a big Sunderland fan. I love Sunderland to bits. But because of potentially working in the industry and having to follow a lot of other clubs and teams and players and managers and trends, etc., I think I've become more of a general football fan than just exclusively a Sunderland fan. And you notice this on social media. If you criticise a player, if you criticise a club, if you criticise a transfer, etc., the diehards that can't see beyond the parameters of their own fandom, their own obsession with that one club, will come at you quite hard. When actually, I think there's just a bigger picture at play. Like, it's like when, you probably saw it during the Euros, there's certain elements of English football Twitter that can't ever accept that their club's player might not be playing that well for England. And it turns, and you don't get out of these club biases throughout an entire tournament, and then everyone just argues throughout the entirety of a tournament. We get knocked out, and then people look for someone to blame, whether it's Phil Foden, Trent Alexander-Arnold, Saka, Bellingham, Kane. It doesn't matter, but there'll always be United fans going after Trent. There'll always be Chelsea fans blaming Saka because Palmer should have played, for example, and vice versa. Yeah. So I just think people are just too tribal on social media these days. And actually, I think it would be helpful if more people were just less obsessed with their own team and in their own bubble of their own team, and we're a little bit more understanding that football should be for everyone and everyone's opinions are valid. And whether it's a critique of your team, people aren't that personal. It's not an attack on you. Stop defending it as if your life depends on it.
Do you think because you're a Sunderland fan, you've kind of had to take a broader approach to liking football? Because as an Arsenal fan, genuinely, in the first year under Emery, I watched more football than I can't only watch these guys. This can't be where I live and die.
Yeah, I think so. I think it probably has been. Sunderland's glory years were finishing seventh in back-to-back years in the early 2000s. I was like 6 or 7. I don't really remember that. So I've never really seen Sunderland be particularly good. I think we finished 10th under Steve Bruce once. That's like the height of my experience as a Sunderland fan. Obviously the occasional game at Wembley, but they've always been in the the lower tiers or the lower leagues, as it were. So yeah, I think the fact that Sunderland generally haven't been particularly good in my time has meant that I've taken an interest in other sides. You know, whether Sunderland were in the Premier League or not, I was watching every game on Match of the Day. I was watching as many Premier League games as I could. Whether Sunderland were in the Champions League or not, obviously not. I was, obsessed with the Champions League growing up. I'm, since working in football, I've become, an avid follower of the Bundesliga, La Liga, Serie A, etc. So I think there is so much out there to enjoy, and if your team is not giving you, full satisfaction at the moment, just because they're going through a difficult time, then there's so much other stuff to be enjoying, and it only broadens your appreciation of football. I think following other leagues and getting out of your bubble, I think, is always a good thing. Whether that's sport, politics, news, the whole thing. It's very easy on social media. Social media keeps on throwing stuff at us that they know that we're going to engage with. Whether that's controversial football opinions, controversial news headlines, they want you to be riled up. They want you to be engaged. They want you to be frustrated. And so don't just fall for that. Get out of your echo chamber. Hear other people's opinions, because it is very, very easy to only follow people whose opinions you necessarily completely align with, on a range of topics, not just sport. So that would be my advice.
Yeah, solid. Very solid. Separately, away from Chelsea, well, I guess technically still around Chelsea. What do you think of multi-club ownership? I think it's something that, on some level, I understand the critique, right? I've done a level of research around it. I think there's definitely valid concerns around the idea. One club that works as essentially the head club for a bunch of them, right? The idea that then of true competition dies. I think the way City do it, for example, isn't the best thing in the world. But I think it kind of just reveals what football is becoming, or what it's always been, maybe. That it's a business, right? Like at the end of the day, people are trying to maximize on player A's, B, and C to take advantage where other teams don't see the value in certain areas. So I think it's maybe just too open, too harsh as a situation where we know when we look and we say, okay, cool, this is what happens now. Where do you stand? How do you feel about it as a whole?
Yeah, I think, as you say, it's kind of, Pandora's box is kind of open on multi-club ownership. You look at RB Leipzig, you look at Man City, particularly in the last few years, clubs like Chelsea trying to do it now with Strasbourg and other clubs as well. I could see why it's really appealing for owners, having a place where you can expand your scouting, you can send your younger players and they can develop away from the spotlight, these feeder clubs. And they even existed beforehand, Chelsea and Vitesse had an unofficial arrangement. I think Spurs and Real Madrid.
Club affiliates.
Yeah, exactly. And Spurs and Real Madrid had a special relationship at one stage, which to my eyes just looked like Spurs sold their best players to Real Madrid. But yeah,
what happens?
But it didn't seem like it was a particularly two-way relationship. I'm not totally.
That's something.
That's true. That is true. That is true, and he was very good there for a few years. So yeah, it is definitely in full motion. It's happening. I think it has been done quite effectively by some clubs. You look at RB Leipzig with RB Salzburg. That model has worked pretty perfectly for them. There is an element of frustration. You look at the case of Savio recently. Joining Troyes, then going on loan to Girona, does well at Girona, then gets signed permanently by Man City. How do you assess whether a correct transfer fee has been paid? It feels like one club will always be the loser in that. Is he, I can't even remember the fee. Is he a 25, 30 million pound winger? Probably not. He's probably a bit more than that. But they haven't probably paid his full value because they own both clubs. It's a little bit dodgy, isn't it? But then I feel like a lot of clubs' complaints probably come from a little bit of jealousy as well. Like, it was legal to do. It still is legal to do if they had the option to do that. And you look at how some clubs are run when they've only got one club under their wing. You look at the case of Everton in recent seasons, for example. Bordeaux, yeah, folding as a whole institution. And there's been other clubs in England like Bury and Macclesfield and places like that that have really struggled financially. It's not for everyone, and you've got to be an incredibly wealthy and successful one club to even think about opening up others. So yeah, we'll see. I don't think it will become particularly prevalent because it is such hard work, and even the Chelsea-Strasbourg relationship doesn't seem to be working perfectly at the moment, although it is very early days. So yeah, we'll see what happens in the future, but I don't think it's going to be something that every club in 10 years, Arsenal, Man United, Bayern Munich all have feeder clubs, or at least not in official terms.
Okay. So where do you stand on it though? Would you, if you could control it, would you be against it entirely? Like, would you abolish club ownership, or would you just let it be? Because it's always existed in one form or another.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd probably abolish it ideally, but I think it's probably a bit of an unrealistic conversation now, given it's so far down the line. I can't see that happening now. But yeah, I don't think it's totally fair for the reasons I outlined in terms of transfer fees, in terms of, you know, necessarily having what's best for the player at the heart of what you're doing. You know, the amount of youngsters that Chelsea are buying from around the world, instantly buying, probably don't have much of a chance of making it at Chelsea because they've signed 15 other wonder kids. They're all going to Strasbourg. Is that necessarily the best for the player's development? Probably not. Is it necessarily the best use of their funds? Probably not either. And, you know, if Chelsea didn't have that Strasbourg, for example, I'm just picking out Chelsea. I could pick out any club in this example. But if they didn't have Strasbourg, they'd probably spend more time, you know, improving their academy and making sure that those guys got the minutes to then develop, to even sell, to help with their PSR issues. It just feels like there are some clubs that are making far too many transfers at the moment, and they are facilitated in doing that by having a feeder club associated with them. So I only think it's going to cause issues down the line.
No, I hear it. I hope not, though. I don't know why my view on it's changed recently, but the idea is just like, if enough clubs do it, I like things, we'd find like an ethical middle ground for it, right? Like, everyone kind of knows what the pipeline is if certain teams come in for your players, right? We spoke about the Spurs Madrid example. Even though it was never exactly the same thing, you kind of knew that, okay, Madrid have a chance of getting Morata ahead of somebody else that somebody else might want. But matter of factly, that if Spurs player X has an incredible year, he's almost definitely going straight to Madrid. Like, those things have always kind of been there. And when I think about the Salzburg example, for example, I honestly don't know if we would have seen a lot of those players make that level of advancement the way they did and get the profile the way they did and play Champions League football as early as some of them did. And when I look at specifically at the Red Bull group, I think, as weird as the idea of like a brand existing in football is, I also think there's also a way for them to kind of just try and maximize in the way that does maximize the players, right? Like, nobody thinks of any Red Bull team as, the apex, and they seem to be okay with trusting that they source players so well that there will always be another player. I think it encourages teams to think more expansively than they might have. I think Chelsea do it like shit though, but I have an agenda against Chelsea generally. So I think speaking about them is easier for the listeners to take in than anything else.
Yeah, no, I get your point. I think Red Bull have done it pretty effectively. The way they've shopped in Mali and other places in West Africa in recent years, and yeah, they do back themselves to sell them on for huge profits. You look at Dani Olmo this summer. They'll probably sell Lewis Openda next summer. They are just pretty seamless at finding the right players.
There's always a Salzburg player that's linked with a really big team, or a Leipzig player, like immediately. If you
and also because they're
about to sign.
Well, exactly, and also because they play the same philosophy in all their clubs. They hire coaches that are set into that certain philosophy. It's a pretty seamless idea, and it's a very transferable philosophy. In terms of, most teams are quite a heavy pressing side these days. Most sides play fairly vertically as well. Red Bull players fit into a lot of different systems. So they're moulding players to be sold for profit and doing it very effectively. But, I mean, Red Bull is such an impressive organisation in terms of how they've gone from a drinks brand to, well, putting a man into space and all the different, sponsorships they do, the clubs that they now own, the sports they're now involved in. It's a pretty impressive company.
Honestly, it is weird though. I can't deny that aspect of it. I think it'll always be a bit of a strange thing that the sponsor is bigger than like the football organization. But hey, I guess it happens. It happens. In terms of football generally though, I don't know if you'd have seen it yet, but Ronaldo, Nazario R9, said recently that he started to find football a bit boring, that he's moved towards tennis as his source of excitement when it comes to sports. How much truth do you think there is in that? Do you think you've experienced any of that as like in your own capacity?
It's a really good question. I don't personally find it boring, although I know a lot of people that do. And there's a lot of colleagues, even at Football Daily, who are, by definition of the job and the title that they've got, like football obsessives, and they'll complain about Man City and the sort of style of play. I've always loved watching Pep Guardiola sides. I think it's absolutely fascinating. I think they've almost been taken for granted in the way that they've changed football throughout different leagues, different countries. The whole ethos around football, and I think it's beautiful to watch. Yes, there's a lot of passes involved, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. You see some clips. People are also just such nostalgia merchants. You've probably seen it on Twitter over the last couple of weeks. I think it's a clip from Chelsea and Arsenal in 2003, and it's a 2-minute video. Maybe it's a poor example, but the standard of play is just completely different. The amount of time the ball spends in the air, the depth that the defensive line is back, the lack of pressing, the long balls just repeatedly just kicked up from end to end. And these were two of the best sides in the country at the time. So, what was going on in the Championship, in League One, in the Bundesliga, in Liga 1, wherever, it does feel like people have become a little bit spoiled. I also think that there might be the element of football that people are saying it's boring because I think the market's maybe a bit saturated. I think there might be too much football on TV. Effectively you could watch a game every single day of the week. People watch football for the moments now rather than 90 minutes. People's attention spans are definitely shorter. They want to have a social media take. They want to share their views on social media. They want to watch goals. They want to watch entertainment. And I actually think the level of goals has actually probably gone up in the last 5 years compared to the previous 5 years. I don't have that to hand, but it definitely doesn't feel like a dramatic drop-off. But people have a constant need now in every walk of life for instant gratification. And a football match is still going to be 90 minutes long. There are still going to be games which are incredibly dull. There are still going to be amazing games. There are still going to be games where there's such a great tactical battle that both managers effectively cancel each other out. There's also going to be games where there's very few mistakes made because, yes, there are great moments of skills in games, but actually every goal pretty much ever scored, you can probably count 3 back-to-back mistakes. You make 3 mistakes as a defending side, it ends up being a goal back-to-back. Yeah. It's kind of inevitable. So, yeah, sometimes the just defenders are on good form and it ends up being a 0-0. I don't think football's boring. I think there's maybe too much of it on TV. I think people are, as I say, maybe bored of the quantity of it. But I don't think the quality's dropped dramatically, if I'm totally honest.
Okay. I think that's definitely a fair approach, especially when you mention, because I did see that clip of Arsenal versus Chelsea. There's a weird thing for Prem early 2000s football. I'm just like, the football generally, like if you watch like a mid-table side then versus now, it's night and day.
Yeah.
It's night and day. Like matter-of-factly, you'd much rather watch Wolves vs Everton now than Wolves vs Everton in 2002. It's not close. You die trying to rewatch any of those games. And there's a reason you'll never see a clip from any of those games. But
yeah,
I do think, though, that there might be an argument about players having less individual responsibility. And I think that potentially makes football less boring. I think what the Euros did really well is that, like when teams are kind of underdogs, you notice who their best player is a lot faster than I think you do when you watch league football, right? Where everything's kind of restricted, and I guess, I don't want to say the coaches have too much control because you'd want your coach to have control. But I do think that there's an argument to be made that sometimes, players don't have as much responsibility as they should. But I don't know if that's on coaches but I think that is the only level of critique that you could probably afford football today as opposed to in like 2006.
Yeah, I think there's definitely an element of that. There's, every player's coached for a system, or at least the most successful sides. There's very few mavericks in the game now. Having said that, you do get throwback teams. Like I think most people found Spain in the Euros pretty thrilling with Lamine Yamal and Nico Williams on either wing. They definitely weren't that structured. They kind of attacked as they wanted to. But yeah, we definitely need to make sure that the more creative players are allowed to thrive, and the likes of Odegaard, Bruno Fernandes, Kevin De Bruyne, that there's a continual push through of players like that, and it doesn't just become these sort of physical specimens. Because I actually think football's becoming, Guardiola initially sort of led a transition to smaller, more technical players, and now I think he's looking for very technical but physically built players. You look at the size of that Man City side, I think it goes under the radar. I think they're absolutely massive. Ruben Dias, Akanji, Rodri, of course, in the middle of the park. They're physical specimens. So they're looking to dominate you technically and physically. And it feels like, they're maybe not as complete, Man City, as they were in sort of 2017-18, at least in terms of a footballing watch, but they might be a more complete package in terms of that physicality and technical ability sort of blended.
I hear that. I think they're a more balanced side. Less exciting, but they're definitely a lot more balanced. I guess that shows, right? Like, they aren't as easy to get at as they used to be. When people say exciting, I think a lot of the time they actually do mean defensively open. Like when Arsenal are called boring, it's like, well, yes, because you're not going to score against Arsenal 9 times out of 10. And it's just like they're a defensively solid team. Atletico Madrid are seen as boring. It's just like, well, yes, because traditionally when they're at their best, that's one of the defensive juggernauts in Europe. Like it happens. I don't think coaches and teams aim to be exciting to neutrals. I think it's a strange thing that I think fans sometimes impose on teams that they don't necessarily watch every week. It's just like, why on earth would City want to be super exciting for non-City fans? It's like, if that's the case, you're not going to win that much. Like when Arsenal were the most exciting team in the world in like 2007, 2008, we didn't win anything. And all we have now is a bunch of TikToks where they say that Arsenal team was... And I promise you, as much as I loved it, I'd have killed to have won and stopped United at some point in time when they won 3 in a row, because they weren't more exciting than us. They weren't. But what did it do?
Yeah, absolutely. It feels like winning will always be the priority for these sides. It's the priority from a business sense of view as well. 20, 30 passes per move, a 30 pass sequence isn't going to pay the bills. What's going to pay the bills is qualifying for the Champions League, it's winning trophies, it's improving your marketability. And there is an element of, you want to be attractive on the eye for that, but I just don't think it carries that much sway. People in general are glory supporters. They will support whoever is winning, and winning is the most important thing, and it will continue to be that.
So as a Sunderland fan, what do you look for most, like when you guys appoint a new coach? What's the goal? Do you want him to be exciting, or are you thinking just get us fucking promoted and that's it?
Yeah, I mean, Premier League is definitely the priority in terms of the return at some stage. It's been a long sort of 5 years now. No, even longer. It was, 3-4 years in League One. It's been 6 years. So, yeah, it's been a long, long time. In terms of what I look for, at the moment, we've gone down a completely different model of trying to sign very young players, trying to build them up. We had the youngest average age in the Championship last year. And... yeah, we're trying to go down a different model. We're scouting for more interesting places. We're appointing managers from more interesting places. Our new manager, Reggie Lebris, was Lorient boss. He actually got relegated from Ligue 1 with them last year, but did well the year before, and then lost a number of players that summer, including Enzo Lefebvre, who went to Rennes, and now he's gone to Roma. So it does feel like he's what he's best known for is being a talent developer, and he worked as a talent developer and as a background coach and academy coach long before he became a manager. So, yeah, when we appointed him, I just thought, yeah, hopefully this is the guy to get the best out of these young players, because I do think it's quite an interesting model. Very few teams in the Championship have really tried to do it. Most teams have tried to throw money and sign the best players, but if you don't go up, then you end up in massive financial issues. You look at Derby County over the last few years. So I like the approach we're taking, and I also, I want to be entertained for sure, but I just want to get back to the Premier League. I want to win. I want to win games, and last year was really disappointing for us, so I'm hoping for a better campaign this time round.
I hope the best for you guys. Honestly, you've made me a Sunderland sympathiser. It's been tough. It's been tough having to watch you guys go down, and then obviously look at what Newcastle are like right now. It's just like fuck it hell. I'd hate to be on the other side of that. So my heart goes out to you sincerely. I hope Sunderland are back at some point in time. But before we wrap this up, I want to just say thanks again for taking the time. I have 2 more questions for you. Very simple, easy to answer ones. I think I know your answer to one. I'm hoping I'm wrong. The first one is, who do you think should win the Ballon d'Or?
Ooh, I'm going to go with Vinicius Jr. I think he had the best.
I'm so happy I was wrong, because I think that's the correct answer.
Oh, good. Who did you think I was going to say?
Rodri.
Oh, no, not this year.
Okay, I'm grateful. And my second question is, if you could change one thing in footballing history, one result, what result would...
I mean, it's a very recent one, but I'd really like England to win the Euros against Spain, even though they didn't deserve it, really. I'm going to go with that. I don't think there's any Sunderland game that really sticks out. I'd have loved to beat Newcastle in the FA Cup in January, but is that really what I'm going to pull out from the entirety of history? I'm going to go with England winning the Euros. I get so much joy from watching England. I've really loved the journey under Gareth Southgate over the last few years. I think he is much unfairly maligned, and it would have capped off his era in the best possible way and really shut up his detractors, because I do think England, we might come to regret the way we treated Gareth Southgate at points, particularly online. Because, yeah, be careful what you wish for, because he did an exceptional job compared to previous England managers. People will come back and be like, the squad's that much better. Yeah, we've had very good squads in the past and got nowhere near where he took us. So let's see what happens in the future. But that was a painful one.
Yeah, no, that, and I'm sad that was your answer, because I was hoping it'd be like a playoff final, because you guys were in the playoff final, right? I think a year ago or so.
We were in the semi-finals against Luton.
There we go. Yeah.
And we had a 2-1 lead from the first leg and then lost 2-0 at Kenilworth Road. And yeah, we're deservedly beaten. So that was quite painful. But yeah, they then won the playoff final against Coventry and deserved to go up. So
and look, they went down anyway. I think that might make it a bit easier now. It's like it wasn't like the start of like.
Although I didn't have that much pain watching them last year, because I kind of enjoyed the story of Luton. If it was any side I wanted to lose to, it was a tiny club with an 11,000 seater stadium. It's refreshing seeing new clubs in the Premier League. So fair play to Luton. I hope they bounce back, but hope they don't go up automatically this year.
Okay, good. A cycle for a good story, clearly. Clearly. But yeah, Dougie, once again, thank you for taking the time, man. I can't thank you enough for doing this with me. It really means a lot to me, dude.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Kenya, and good luck with everything in the future. I think you've got a bright one.
Awesome. Thank you, dude.